we talk about the 5 stages of grief people go through. At first they were angry, and then they're kind of getting to the acceptance. We're going to see the end of that initial cycle where they re-upped with VMware to give them time to sort of plan out their next move. So I got to imagine you're starting to see a bit of that exodus happening.
It is happening right after the acquisition. A lot of customers believed that they would be treated special. Broadcom would not be as bad on them. And there was this feeling that they'd be spared.
They made a lot of changes in a very short amount of time, and it really caught a lot of people off guard.
They get that bill so late in the cycle, they gives them very little time to change. I've seen companies who have workloads where they're so afraid to containerize because they don't have the original developers, or probably don't even have the developers anymore.
Those are typically the most important applications in a company,
Probably.
too.
This is an existing application that was running forever in a virtual machine.
Don't anybody touch it. Don't anybody touch it.
Most of these customers have 3 choices. Stay close to what VMware was doing, go to the public cloud, or modernize my application. This plan needs to start now.
If you feel like the ground has shifted underneath enterprise infrastructure over the past year, you're not alone. Between VMware's licensing changes, rising cloud costs, and the pressure to modernize thousands of applications, many leaders are scrambling for a realistic path forward, one that doesn't take 10 years or break the business. Welcome back to IT Visionaries. I'm your host, Chris Brandt. Today, I'm joined by Mano Bhattacharya, Chief Technology Officer at Nutanix, one of the most talked about platforms in the middle of this VMware turning point. Mano has been at Nutanix since the early days and has watched the industry evolve from the traditional 3-tier architecture to hyperconverged infrastructure, hybrid cloud, and now AI-driven environments. His perspective is both technical and incredibly practical. And I'm excited to dig into where the industry is headed and how companies can navigate this moment with confidence. Mano, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Really excited to be here.
I am too. I've been, working with Nutanix in one way or another for, since the beginning. And it's such an interesting company, I think, too. And I don't think people who've not been in tech for a while or, seen the evolution of, startups realize the leadership, mob that came out of Nutanix. I mean, everybody from, Bipul Sinha and Mohit, with Rubrik and Cohesity, you got Dheeraj, you got all these guys, yourself, all A-list players here, that came out of the Nutanix startup. And either, did amazing things at Nutanix or went off and, did amazing things at other companies as well. So it's a really interesting company to talk to. And because you kind of defined the hyperconverged infrastructure space too, I think that's a really notable piece of Nutanix. But I think the thing is that now you guys are really front and center to this big change in infrastructure that's happening right now. And it's so related to VMware, and obviously there's other things happening and pressures that are moving that AI and things like that too. But I think the VMware one is the acquisition of VMware by Broadcom really changed the dynamic because everybody had VMware, right? And Absolutely. For people who aren't aware, you guys have a competing product in Acropolis Hypervisor, AHV, that is becoming front and center of this sort of replatforming movement that's happening now. Could you talk a little bit about what your perspective on all these changes has been and what you've been seeing in the market?
Yeah, let me start a little bit with how much we respect VMware and the product. In fact, if you think of Nutanix, we started off as a first offering as storage for VMware. That's exactly what we did for the first 3 years before we evolved to create our own hypervisor and the whole full stack of management and operations. But with what is happening, there is, I think, a lot of confusion that's there in the market because Broadcom is not being very consistent with what their pricing model is, how they're treating different customers. Every customer has a very different view of how Broadcom is affecting them. Sometimes They are being very aggressive in pricing, making sure that they get the deals, make sure it happens. At sometimes they're keeping customers at a distance. So I think all our customers, and in fact, a lot of our prospects, and there are so many of them who are flocking to us, is basically looking at alternatives, because at the end of the day, people want to diversify and make sure that you come onto a platform where you can actually migrate, if not all, part of your workloads to a platform, and then give that choice to their lines of businesses. So in case something happens, in case there is some sort of a negotiation breakdown or a pricing pressure in which they cannot accept, they have an alternative. So I think that has been the key driver for most enterprises today. And we are definitely one of the key alternatives that is there. I mean, if you think of it, most of these customers have kind of three choices. One is probably stay close to what VMware was doing,
Hmm.
build out another hypervisor platform with a full stack of management and operations. The second is, how do they go and use the public cloud? Because I see a lot of people who had ambitions of moving to the public cloud. They want to do so very quickly, because instead of paying VMware again, they would want to actually take their applications and move it to the public cloud. And I think the third wave of customers is like, how do I modernize my application? So either stay with what is there in the market, what they had with VMware, come to a hypervisor that looks and feels similar, or go to the public cloud, do a lift and shift. Because it's very hard to refactor within a very short period of time. Because if you want
Sure.
to go cloud native, it takes a lot of time. But at the same time, that's the effort that people are doing is, hey, if we can do this, do the containerization, make sure that I can orchestrate through a bunch of microservices, build in the observability. Now I can make my application modern and then deploy it anywhere, then deploy it on-prem or in the public cloud. So I think from that angle, we are trying to position ourselves on all of this, making sure that
Yeah.
our product spans all these three areas, that we become the best alternative from a VMware angle, so that if you want to move VMware as is, similar as it's from a perspective of training your people, making sure that your operations stay as close to the hypervisor that you had, we are very, very similar. On the second front, when customers want to move their enterprise workloads to the public cloud, we also offer an NC2 offering, which actually allows us to do a very similar thing, which allows you to lift and shift. Because if you think of enterprise applications, right, enterprise applications were pretty much written in the 90s, before cloud, before microservices. So they were very scale up monolithic applications. And
Right.
in those applications, a lot of the resilience and availability was kind of the responsibility of infrastructure, because the applications did not have those resiliency built in. They did not have replica sets. They did not have sharding. All
Yeah.
of these came much later with the public cloud. So I think when you move to the public cloud, our NC2 offering offers exactly that, gives you that ability to get what we call a private cloud experience in the public cloud. That means you get all the resilience, availability. Think of all your HA, DR, all of the stretch replication, everything in the public cloud. And finally, as people are moving to cloud native, we see a lot of opportunities there too, because on the same platform that we have on Nutanix, just like virtualization now with our Kubernetes platform, we are helping our customers to rewrite or in sometimes refactor their applications and move forward. And we see different competitors here also. I mean, in the public cloud, we see public clouds also trying to do the same thing, bring them to cloud native, putting in a lot of services. In the case of what you call cloud native applications, we see a similar effort from Red Hat OpenShift, which is doing a lot to bring applications and move them to pure cloud native and Kubernetes formats. They're also coming in with a lot of product and services to help the customer. So I think it's a very dynamic environment, but the way we are really making sure is that we address all these three concerns, making sure that either, if you want to keep some of your workloads exactly in a virtual machine form factor with a hypervisor, you can do that. If you want to do a lift and shift to the public cloud, and you probably have some good credits with the public cloud or some sort of negotiated deals with the public cloud, you can do that. Or if you're moving to pure cloud native and using containers and Kubernetes, you can do that. So that's the three areas that I would say that we are focused on.
Yeah, and I would say too, I saw a lot of folks actually running containers on top of, VMware as well because of just sort of flexibility and convenience factors there. So, like in a way that's if you're in that world, you're kind of in the best case scenario, I guess, because you could either
Yeah.
just continue to move it over to a new hypervisor, which would
Yeah.
probably be a lot more portable and easy, and then or just go, kind of native as well too,
Yeah,
right?
and in some sense, containers on virtual machines make sense for majority of applications because if you think of the separation of concerns, right? Now, in the case of virtual machines were always built for the infra operators. They were built for resilient applications.
Yeah.
And containers were all built for application writers. They were built for faster iterations, faster, modification of your business logic. Now they are complementary. Now, having your containers on a highly available platform is actually good for you, not bad for you.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, what you get is like, think of like if I'm running a stateful application and I have, let's say, state in my memory, imagine your caches that are there for large applications. Now, if a container goes down and brings up in another place when you're doing maintenance of your hardware, you're losing performance because these caches need to build up because sometimes these caches can be very large.
Yeah.
If you think of the cases where oversubscription actually helped you, for example, we actually run virtual machines with 2 to 1, 3 to 1 oversubscription, basically because of the type of the application, because many of these applications are very IO bound and those
Mm-hmm.
CPUs can be oversubscribed. And in fact, if you go with microservices, one of the things that we see is you become more IO bound because in the microservices world, what happens is many of the times, which was a function call in a monolithic application, actually becomes a network call because you're now making an RPC or a REST API. So
Yeah.
you get more IO bound. So a lot of the oversubscription benefits that you got, the way you planned your applications actually works well with actually containers on virtual machines. And I think we see this not only in the enterprise. Actually, we see this in the public cloud also, because even in the public cloud, when you actually see containers, you see a lot of them on VMs, not on bare metal. Now, there are some cases where we do see containers on bare metal, and we do want to actually address that too, because our NKP offering does run on bare metal, is to see like some very advanced AI applications where it is very, very CPU hungry or GPU hungry, and you want to get the last inch of performance from your machine, or you're in the edge where you're running a few containers where the cost of the hypervisor might not make sense. But if you leave these two, I would say, cases out where you're running maybe just an AI application or the most compute intensive part of an AI application, or you're running in the edge, virtualization is probably the better way to deploy content, because now you don't have to do maintenance of your hardware. Like especially if you're running with Nutanix, right? Our HV hypervisor maintains our firmware upgrades. The hardware is very symmetrical for the containers because we abstract all the different hardware into virtual devices which look and feel the same. So from the perspective of application deployment, it gives a cleaner abstraction to run on virtual machines than on bare metal. So it's very interesting. And that's why I think most containers today in enterprise and in the public cloud are running on virtual machines, and they just easily move to AHV.
Well, and I think too, you have two groups involved there, right? I mean, you have an infrastructure group who understands infrastructure well, and you have, the app developers and the DevOps groups that understand applications, and they don't necessarily want to have to deal with,
Yeah,
hardware
infrastructure.
update cycles and
Exactly.
things like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So that is very so the availability of a resilient infrastructure is always complementary to applications. And I think it works really well with a composite offering, which actually can run containers and virtual machines together in the same way. And that's what we are doing even from the perspective of management. Like, for example, just like in the public clouds, we are bringing, from example, deploying our container ecosystem, upgrading our ecosystem, connecting our container ecosystem to virtual machines. All of these are getting part of the Nutanix cloud platform. So the cloud platform now uniformly treats both containers and virtual machines at the same level. So imagine you wanted to create, let's say, a VPC across containers, across your Kubernetes clusters and your virtual machines. You can do that. You want to create a project that spans that. So you get the multi-tenancy that you want. You want the isolations that you want across containers and VMs in a very symmetric way.
This episode of IT Visionaries is brought to you by Meter, the company building better networks. Businesses today are frustrated with outdated providers, rigid pricing, and fragmented tools. Meter changes that with a single integrated solution that covers everything: wired, wireless, and even cellular networking. They design the hardware, write the firmware, build the software, and manage it all so your team doesn't have to. That means you get fast, secure, and scalable connectivity without the complexity of juggling multiple providers. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Go to meter.com/ITV to book a demo now. That's meter.com/ITV. I think it's interesting because you mentioned I think it's a big jump for a lot of folks to go to containers if they don't have those core competencies in their environment right now. And literally every company is virtualized in some way for the most part right now. And I think what we saw when the Broadcom acquisition happened is they made a lot of changes in a very short amount of time, and I think it really caught a lot of people off guard, and people really didn't have time to sort of think through the best way to move forward, or the time to even just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I imagine that there was, we talk about the sort of 5 stages of grief, people go through. At first they were angry, and then this and that, and then they're kind of getting to the acceptance, and they kind of re-up. But I think that, we're going to see the end of that initial sort of cycle where they kind of re-upped with VMware, and then, to buy them time to sort of plan out their next move. So I got to imagine, like, you're starting to see, like a bit of that exodus happening now too. I mean, are you seeing like that? Because I know initially there was sort of a big shift to AHV, but I imagine there's almost probably a bigger second wave coming. Are you starting to see that happening too?
It is happening. The thing is, what you mentioned, right? Right after the acquisition, a lot of customers believed that they would be treated special, that Broadcom would not be as bad on them as they have been with their other acquisitions. And there was this feeling that they'd be spared.
Yeah.
Frankly, and the way this is happening is they get that bill so late in the cycle, the transition cycle, they gives them very little time to change. And many of the times they are now locked into 3 years, 5 years, or even longer 10 years terms for their licenses. But as they are doing this, they know that they need to have this new way of doing things to give optionality, the 3 things that I was mentioning, whether they give a separate hypervisor choice or a move to cloud choice or to containerize this. So I think this is happening. Now, the problem I feel is a little bit about how leadership in these companies are taking. Some companies, I would say, are aggressively doing it, saying, I know I'm going to go out, let's say in 5 years, and my transition will take, let's say, 3 years. I need to create a POC plan. I need to enact on the plan. I might have tens of thousands of virtual machines and applications that need to move, and I need to start now. Some, I would say, they are still debating on what path to take. They're not convinced that one would be the right one, because it's a hard thing. Because as you think, like, you've trained your people, and I think most of it comes down to organization and leadership. Because if you think of like large organizations and people who have actually created a life and I would say an entire career on VMware and running VMware ecosystems, it's very hard for them to give that up and learn something new.
Sure.
So I think that has always been a big issue. And we see that all the time between various companies. But leadership which has actually driven hard, made sure that they have a plan and execute to a plan, have been more successful than others to diversify faster, give those options, and whatever that option could be. I mean, and I'm sure that every company is making this different options, and these options based on workloads also, because not all workloads are easily doable. Like, you cannot move everything to the public cloud or everything to cloud native, because I've seen companies who have workloads where they're so afraid to containerize because they don't have the original developers, or probably don't even have the developers anymore.
Right,
So this
right.
is existing application that was running forever in a virtual machine.
And I will say those are typically the ones that you are the most important applications in a company too, because the ones
Probably
that
that's
like don't anybody touch it, don't anybody touch it,
don't anybody touch it.
Yeah,
And for them, coming out of VMware, trusting somebody, making sure is a hard thing. So I believe that this will take its time, but we see that happening and the interest happening. People are making inquiries, POCs, all of this. And I think that as we try for the next renewal, I always say that so we have a renewal wave now, then there'll be another renewal wave in the 3 to 5 year span, depending on the
right.
terms of licenses. That majority of them actually have 5 year licenses now. That's what typically I see with VMware. Between this time, there will be a massive transition plans. And I think because migration will not happen within, let's say, another 90 days, people will take a couple of years to migrate, sometimes 3 years to migrate.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
this plan and that's what we're doing with Nutanix. When we go to a customer, we don't just say, hey, just take our product. We actually first look at their workloads, we look at their ecosystem, we look at how they are deployed, and then we engage with them with our services, we engage them with planning, making sure that there is a proper way to migrate. Because at the end of the day, if after all this it comes down that I cannot move, then it is very, very difficult, because VMware does not believe in partial accounts. So basically,
Right.
they'll make you pay for the full thing,
All
even
or
if you
nothing.
use partially, all or
Yeah.
nothing. So they have to plan for a diversification of it early, so that those possibilities are inspected and acted on.
Yeah. Well, and so I mean, it does seem like AHV has become sort of the top contender there for sort of where people are moving to. I mean, what do
Yeah, in
you?
fact, specifically if you want to stay on a very similar hypervisor. In fact, I was in Gartner yesterday, and there was this whole session on what you call the alternatives of VMware. And there was very clean, like, there were various options, but Nutanix was the number one option if you want to keep your organizational skills as close to VMware as possible, because our operation. So we typically feel that, a VMware admin with experience should be able to move to being Nutanix admin within a few days to weeks. So it
Hmm.
won't take you like months to become a Kubernetes expert, which is what you would need if you were to use Red Hat OpenShift. Because in OpenShift, the biggest problem is everything, even virtual machine operations that they've done with KubeVirt, has to be done through Kubernetes. So there is a big skills gap from somebody who was running infrastructure to actually now running Kubernetes. So your virtual machines are containers that get deployed and scheduled like containers. So it's a very different mindset. So
Yeah.
it's not that one thing is good or bad. It's just that the chasm is wide enough that many enterprises find it daunting to actually now take all the people that they have who have learned VMware for a long period of time, and then quickly move them to running KubeVirt and OpenShift.
Well, and so I mean, AHV has been around for a long time too. I mean, you kind of how long is AHV? It's really like 10 years, something like
11
that.
years.
11 years. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we start actually 10 plus. We are on the 11th year, right? I mean, I think we
Okay.
just completed. Yeah, 2015 is, I think, when we started.
Yeah. So I mean, there's been a lot of maturity built into that into the environment, right? So I mean, I think initially one of the value props around Nutanix. I mean, Nutanix had a lot of value props that you came to market with. It wasn't just. I always said when I talked about Nutanix, it's like it's not really even worthwhile to look at Nutanix in the sense of like I want to get a hyper-converged platform. I always thought the value proposition around Nutanix was more about like all the other stuff that Nutanix brings to the game. I mean, I remember Dheeraj talking early on about, like we are a cloud in a box kind of thing.
Exactly.
And you had the thing that was cool about it is, like for companies that like were struggling to put together a service catalog and things like that. I mean, you had all the pieces there to kind of, because it was kind of a cloud in a box,
Yeah,
from the
yeah, yeah.
beginning, I mean, so, how do you feel like that value proposition plays out now in the bigger context of like this shift that's happening?
Yeah, I think it's a very good thing that you mentioned, Chris. In fact, that was exactly how Dheeraj explained to me before I joined him. He impressed
Yeah.
on building Nutanix.
Yeah.
And I think this is a major transition that happened from, I would say, running infrastructure in the early 90s to when the public cloud came up. And even before public cloud, I mean, Google was doing something very similar. The hyperscalers, before they were public clouds, they were already building cloud technologies. And I think the biggest difference between how things were done before were you moved literally different types of boxes to software. Now, if you look at enterprise infrastructure, you had all different types of boxes, right? You have boxes for compute, boxes for storage, boxes for networking. But when you move to the public cloud, and I think a lot of it was pioneered by Google at that point is, hey, I will not take these boxes. I will convert those boxes to pieces of software that I can run on commodity hardware. And I think
Hmm.
that has been the true tenet of Nutanix is we take all these boxes and make it work pretty much on any sort of commodity hardware. So whether you're running Dell or HP or Lenovo or Cisco, you're running in the bare metals of the public cloud, it is exactly the same software. It is the same hypervisor. It is the same storage stack. It is the same SDN networking. It is the same management APIs. It is the same operational dashboards. All of this is exactly the same. But while we built it in software, one of the things is we built it with clean, open APIs. And I think this is very different because if you look at the boxes, they were usually tied through some integration points, which were sometimes manual, sometimes it's actually hard to actually integrate them. Most of these were integrated through kind of scripts. IT had like an army. I should that every IT person would literally have his own special toolkit that would be made for their
I saw some
particular.
crazy like PowerShell environments that were like completely run and orchestrated by PowerShell.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not. I mean, that's all they could do because there were no clean APIs to automate against.
Yeah.
But when you bring a cloud-like infrastructure, this is very easily, thought of in layers. You had like an IS layer which had compute in different form factors, virtual machines and now containers. You had storage, you had your networking, all driven through APIs. Now you could do things which were application centric, which was different from how enterprise infrastructure was done. Enterprise infrastructure had infrastructure policies, and you had to map applications to infrastructure policies. And they were different because each of these infrastructure policies were different on what component that came out of. That means if your storage was a different storage vendor or your network was a different storage vendor, it was very, unique for each of these different things to actually put together for a particular application. And what we did, we moved like the public cloud and make everything application centric. So infrastructure policies followed what applications dictated. So it
Yeah.
was much simpler for customers to start thinking about, and specifically for customers who were used to the public cloud, who actually got, you know, or were already using these newer ways of doing things, they found it much simpler to actually use Nutanix with those clean APIs, with the way to layer everything as policies. And you put these policies around applications and let the infrastructure really, I would say, implement those policies as opposed to doing the reverse, that every infrastructure piece has different set of policies and then you try to map an application and the application requirements are somewhat adjusted so that it could map the infrastructure requirements. So I think that was very, very unique for Nutanix. And now I know now, of course, if you look at Kubernetes does exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
But if you think clouds kind of came with this, the intentful way of defining policies and let infrastructure implement those policies. So 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 I think, yeah, I mean, this was truly unique, and that is why I think we got a lot of traction in the field then. But it also allowed us to play with other ecosystem players. Like if you think
Yeah.
of when we started, we could of course run our hypervisor, but we worked our storage with other hypervisors because we worked with standard protocols. when we added our automation framework, we of course would automate with our automation tools, but we could take other automation tools. Like we have people who are using Nutanix at scale with Terraform or Ansible. And in future, if you think of how people are taking on open telemetry as a metric, as a way to actually absorb a lot of the operational metrics, we're going there where we will be not only having our operational offering, ops offering with our own dashboarding, reporting, all of that, but at the same time, expose our metrics through OTel to other platforms. So what we are trying to do is, yeah, we know that we will be part of an ecosystem and you
Yeah.
should be able to utilize the pieces you want. And I think the final optionality that we did not give is how to integrate with storage, especially third-party storage. And this is something that we have started, and I think it is a little bit of push from the market, because when this opportunity came to us, right, most of our customers or new customers and prospects already had such a huge install base of three-tier software, three-tier infrastructure,
Right.
storage boxes and servers. We wanted to give them that, the same optionality we gave for our hypervisor and other layers to storage. And the way we are building it also is with very clean APIs, making sure that we integrate with them. So it's easier for us to integrate one by one each of these storage products. So instead of us going very, hey, we will support everybody on day one, we're taking a very cautious approach, making sure that the way we integrate, the way the APIs work with each other, they work well. We are making sure that each of our design partners and our implementation partners work with engineering to engineering. So effectively making sure that the partnership is real. So from a perspective, when something goes wrong, it doesn't have to be a finger pointing issue between storage vendor and the compute. So we really want to be partners here. We are not doing it as like, hey, it's a one-off. This is something that we are committed to. This is something that we want to integrate very nicely. Exactly like the way I really think about it is from the management plane and my operational dashboards, it should look like HCI. I should still be able to do VM centric policies. But the hypervisor should be smart enough, the compute should be smart enough to know what it can offload and what it cannot. Depending on the type of storage you have, the capabilities you have, we should be able to provide that simplicity across these different storage vendors. And that's what we are really going for, is making sure that these integration points are done correctly without changing the user's view of the Nutanix. So their Nutanix, whatever they are used to from an HCI perspective, of course, there are some things that we just cannot do. Like, for example, integrated hardware upgrades. We can't upgrade pure storage firmware from Nutanix. That's completely a different thing. But from the operations, like if you think from a logical perspective, how I deploy my virtual machines, how I deploy my containers, how I deploy my applications, how do I look at alerts metrics, they should look the same as Nutanix HCI. So your Prism Central, your Prism Ops would look and feel the same way as if you had HCI. So that is actually a very nice way to think about it, is we are a software first company with open APIs for each of these layers. And we can integrate not only our full stack, but we can integrate other third-party tools and software in that stack too. So we give a lot more choices than other software vendors or infrastructure software vendors.
And I think that's kind of a differentiator in a way too for Nutanix. And I think that when you look at the early days of HCI and some of the early competitors that you had that have since gone away, you did have the ability, like you could run AHV, you could run VMware, like you had that ability there. And, there wasn't necessarily a preference one way or the other. And I think that, what we saw from a lot of the other vendors in the early days was sort of the rigidity of that. And I think, there was sort of that initial rigidity of just like the box is the box, and you just, add a box. If you need more storage, you add a box. If you need more compute, you add a box. You're getting what you get, and don't get upset. And I think you guys kind of disaggregated that, and it kind of you had flexibility in that platform, which I think is a really big advantage. And like you mentioned, I think just today I saw the integration with Pure Storage going GA. You've got this Google integration that's just been announced as well. I mean, you got a lot of partner integrations moving along, and I think you hit it right on the head when you were talking there, because it's not about the hardware, it's not about the software necessarily. It's about how you consume resources that's important, and that's ultimately like what I think people missed about sort of this big cloud you know revolution that happened. It
Revolution, yeah.
wasn't so much about like, well, this is just colo by another name or whatever, but it was about how people access resources, how people provision them, how people utilize the resources. And when you talk about that software defined nature of all of that, and that's kind of, it's funny, like from back in the early days when Dheeraj was talking about, the cloud in a box thing. But I mean, I think it was important that you guys took that perspective on it, because I think you kind of were one of the companies early on that really understood that, like, it's about how people want to consume this stuff.
Exactly. It's a consumption model. In fact, I think if you think of all the things that we did beyond infrastructure, right? When we brought in things like files and objects from unstructured storage, I always say our files and objects are very unique. We are not an appliance. Every other filer, if you think of our object store, comes up with a box. We come up with an application. And if you think of files, it's just a virtual machine. When you deploy objects, it's a bunch of containers. So you can use the same hardware. Of course, now the density of disks and everything will vary based on the usage. And that's also the power of the platform, that we can run on these very heterogeneous platforms, from very storage heavy to very compute dense platforms. And you just put that application based on what that application needs. So think of a file server deployment is a scheduling decision of a file services VM on a storage heavy node. It's very different way of thinking how you can deploy software infrastructure compared to hardware infrastructure. Because if you were to build a filer before, the first thing you would I need a separate rack, space for my NetApp box, my Fiber channel. Or you don't have to do that. The same hardware, depending on its capacity, will deploy the files VM. So infrastructure software actually becomes an application. So that is very, very powerful. So anything that you could do with an application, now you can start doing infrastructure operations. Now, as you go higher up the stack, like for example, now we did NDB, the whole database management system is basically a control plane to deploy databases which are scheduled on the right hardware. So the decisions on where to place this is something that we can control based on the type of the application and the type of hardware that is there. So we can do a lot more than if you had completely siloed piece of infrastructure, each for its dedicated usage. And I think that is a very differentiator. That's what make clouds so much more effective, so much more, I would say, reusable from a component perspective, efficient from a component perspective, that they don't have to keep on buying new hardware for new use cases. They can reutilize all of it, and they can find the appropriate placement at the right location. And I think that is very critical. And being software, the advantage that we get is we can go everywhere. With a box, it's very hard to go in all locations because it's software. We are running all the way from the edge to your core data centers, which is where we are mostly used, now to a lot of service providers, because that's another area that is growing wildly for us because of what the Broadcom and their relationship with the service providers. And then, of course, public cloud. So this entire gamut from the edge to the public cloud we can do just because we are software. And effectively this software literally runs the same way on commodity hardware. Now, as we grow more into things which were more localized to globalized, like you see the growth of our management stack, we were tied to something called Prism Central. And Prism Central was really a domain controller. It used to work in a data center. Now, if you think of Nutanix Central, it's something which is stitching these multiple domains. So what we're really going forward is the dream that people had is that workload placement globally. We can do things from Nutanix Central, which we could not do a few years back. So This is all possible because the software is the same. When I deploy it, it's just the same application deployment that I can do in any location. So in these building these in layers helps us a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of like having that sort of management plane and that sort of integration, there. And then like, we talked about sort of this migration off of sort of VMware and where all that lived, and like moving it on to Nutanix. And you have, like for example with this Pure announcement too. I mean, like if you have a bunch of Pure arrays that are you're hosting all your VMware infrastructure, you can still make use of all that infrastructure,
Absolutely.
and then integrate your new hypervisor into that as well. So I think I think that's where that flexibility that you bring to the game is really compelling,
Yeah.
because it's just not a one, because none of this stuff is a one size fits all.
No.
Everybody, and when you talk to everybody's infrastructure is a snowflake, right? And it's all unique, and everybody has to do it a little bit differently. And so like having that ability to do that, but then applying like some standardization and integration and behind that to give them the flexibility, and then just having that sort of software model where you can change the way you do things without a huge lift.
Yeah. And
What
even
what
upgrades, right? Like, for example, when you have hardware upgrades, it's so much simpler. If you had everything in software, we can seamlessly upgrade your hardware without doing forklifts, which was the traditional way. No
Yeah.
downtime, nothing. You just transition and we do all of that for you.
Yeah, and so like if like if you were to say I mean, there's obviously so much happening now, and we briefly mentioned sort of the AI revolution and all that too. If you were talking to a CIO, and you said like and I'm sure, which I'm sure you do all the time, and they're saying like, I what the hell do I do? Like this is madness. This is just madness, Like, how do you, like, what would you say to them right now, like, to prepare them for the next 5 years, which are going to be, as I can see it, utter chaos in in IT and infrastructure and all that. I mean, like, what would you say to them, like, to point them in the right direction?
So I think the important thing for any leader now to accept AI is to also look at not just AI as an application, but as an end-to-end infrastructure and application problem. Because the problem with AI is that everything that happened before us, like before AI, right? Where it typically did not change your core infrastructure. Your x86 was running everything. With AI, what has happened is all the way from your hardware to the way you run your applications have morphed. So, in fact, what I really think about is we should not think about AI as a line of business problem or an IT problem, or sometimes now we have chief data officers, or a data problem, but
Yeah,
it just have to be done together. It has to be brought in together
for
because
sure.
so if you look at from the compute side, now of course you need to now have no longer x86 as your main concern. You need to actually make sure that you have efficient utilization of GPUs, which are actually way more expensive than your CPU cores. You're now looking at integrated GPU and CPU offerings with ARM as a basis. So you
Yeah,
need to look at newer hypervisors where we might need to bring the entire compute platform, including a hypervisor, including our Kubernetes platform on ARM, because that could be the mechanism of deploying majority of the AI applications in the
for
future,
sure.
because maybe most of the power considerations will also force that. You see on the side of networking and storage, a lot of IO is getting offloaded to DPUs. So it's no longer that, I had my NIC and NIC was a dumb NIC. It just sends things back and forth. It's actually doing a lot of stuff. Like if you look at GPU direct from your GPUs, you're actually initiating storage. You are initiating a lot of the networking through these specialized cards. So all of these are now something that an IT personnel has to look at, because this is something that is the future. That you can't actually run applications without it. If you look at a hypervisor now, a hypervisor cannot look at CPU optimizations anymore. It has to look at how do I optimize my IO with my DPUs? How do I give efficient use of my GPUs? Like, for example, and we talk about it a lot, is that the virtual machines now need to have bare metal performance, literally. Like
Yeah,
when you're looking
absolutely.
at, so in fact, our head of compute here, he actually coined this term bare metal virtual machines. And the idea with that is that our virtual machines would actually run as well on VMs as you would do on bare metal, because you will eke out the maximum performance of these devices. If you look at from the infrastructure above, if you look at, for example, now the applications and data, the biggest problem I find is data management, because just like compute is a problem with hypervisor and hardware, data is kind of the lifeblood of AI. And the
Hmm.
problem with data is most data is very unclean in the enterprise, right? And it
Yeah.
doesn't have the right security boundaries. It doesn't have the right necessary ways to join this data. So people are struggling to feed the AI with the right piece of data, because if you see now, everybody is doing something called knowledge graphs of the enterprise. They're trying to build what is my relationship with different objects in my, maybe my Salesforce data, with some of my even NAS data, which could be like contractual documents that I have.
Yeah.
Like, how
Yeah.
do they
And
even relate?
there's
Because
tons of unstructured that just is sitting out there.
is sitting out there. How do you relate that? So AI is becoming a compute problem, a data problem, and of course, the AI itself has its own problem, which is the choosing of models, agents, securing agents. Now that is what we see as AI, right? When you see the blurb of AI, we see this top. Hey, this world is moving into agentic. Everybody is creating MCP servers for their APIs. It's all good. Like I mean, it's perfectly. We need all of these. In fact, agents also needs its own security, because agents are
Yeah.
very dangerous. Because if you look at,
MCP servers have been proven to
yeah,
be problematic too.
yeah,
Yeah, and we're
it's the same
rushing
thing, right?
forward with that. Yeah.
Forward. So the point is, how do we create them under gateways so that when you're accessing a model, you have a gateway which can actually secure who can access it, what data comes in and out of it, so that I can put, for example, guardrails on it. How do I actually make sure I have agents which have those security boundaries? Like, for example, agents are tools, right? Now, sorry, agents have tools. So the tools can actually activate some action, and that action could be dangerous. So based on who is prompting the agent, my action capabilities could be different. So I need agent gateways to do that, so that I can pass on all my identity information to the agent, so that the agent can do the rightful authorized action, as opposed to. So I think there is so much work that needs to be done across so
Huge.
many layers. We have to come as an enterprise to really have, I would say, a coherent strategy, as opposed to disparate strategies of CIOs and CDOs, and I would say CAIOs and CTOs. We need to have literally like some sort of, I would say, the AI committee in an organization to go through all of this. And I think that is very critical, because people are doing many of these things in isolation in the enterprise, which is causing a lot of problems. And I think we need to get together, make all of these things work, and also think about the economics of AI, because I think that's the final thing, is that
Oh my. Yeah.
all use cases might not work with AI, right? That's the
For
final
sure.
thing, because I build all these models, agents, this, that, but what is my use case? So I think that's one thing that, the industry experts, and I go to like any meetings now, there's a huge lecture on AI. But one thing that I've realized is we need this committee, and we need use case driven AI, not AI and look for a use case, because the exploratory part of AI is so expensive. Like if I say I'll try something for 6 months, you'll burn through so much. It's
Mhm.
very hard to now pivot again. So we need to actually have smaller prototypes, dedicated use cases, and learn from peers. Because if a use case has worked with a peer, make sure that it is there. Because the important thing to know is that people are announcing things that are successful, which is good for the enterprise. Because now
Yeah.
in some ways, this is exactly how you think of open source, right? It's not open source code, but this is some way people are, they're announcing, I do great with my whether it's customer support, or this is, I'm great with my sales engineering, or I'm doing great with my coding agents, I'm doing great with my triaging and debugging. And these are the tools that I used. So I think we need to learn very fast from each other, really make sure that all the cases that other enterprises are being successful on, we implement. And then with the extra budget, do very use case driven exploratory projects, as opposed to being blind and telling, hey, every team go do your thing. Whoever succeeds, they can put it. Because I don't think we'll have enough budget to do all of that together.
IT Visionaries is powered today by Meter because every great business relies on great networks. If you're a network engineer, you know how critical uptime, control, and visibility are. Too often, you're stuck troubleshooting issues across fragmented systems or locked into legacy solutions that don't scale. Meter reimagines networking from the ground up. Their full stack solution, from ISP procurement to security, routing, wireless, and beyond, gives you deep control and the performance you need. No more piecing together providers or worrying about bottlenecks. Just seamless, scalable connectivity built for today and tomorrow. Big thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Visit meter.com/ITV to book your demo now. That's METER.com/ITV. I think the challenge right now that I see so much is it just is moving so fast. The capabilities are coming so fast. And I keep hearing people like, well, oh, it sucks for this. And I'm like, yeah, wait a week, it's like, and then it's good, and but which is awesome. But at the same time, I feel like I'm always using a beta product, because I swear from one day to the next, I'll do something, in my, model, and it the next day, it behaves completely differently because something changed. And it's really hard to build around this. And like, I built things, session management's always a really hard thing with AI, right? Because you run out of context, you got to move to a new session and do that. So like, I'm like, all right, well, I got to get all this stuff from this session that was good and get it into this session so I can continue what I was doing. And then so you build that thing, and then then the next day it's like, oh, now we got memory, and we've got these we got these project files, and like everything, all this stuff persists. It's like, I just spent like a week doing that. Couldn't you have like done that a week earlier? I mean, and it's like, and you're somebody who's trying to move a big company and deal with AI. I mean, like, I'm just a guy in his basement, twiddling knobs here, but you got, like, your integration with AI is appreciably harder than what I've got to do. And like, so that does have a material impact on what you do. And even like, you talked about GPUs, and it's just like, it's hard to get GPUs, and then we're virtualizing GPUs, and like which GPU, and then we're moving from like a x86 platform to an ARM platform, and like all these big changes are happening too at breakneck speed with limited availability and just supply chain challenges and things like that.
Yeah, and tokens, man, everything is tokens now.
Yeah, and tokens. You talked about the economics of it. Look at where tokens were a year ago to what they cost today. I mean, it's like, it is heading for zero, right? It's like,
at the same time, the utilization of tokens is not
way
that
up.
efficient. Yeah. So no. It's one thing to think is that to do the same thing, if you look at for how reasoning models are coming up, there is more explainability and more token cost. So we have to be very careful on how do we adjust, because token costs are going down, but actually
but usage is going up,
and actually usage is probably going up faster than actually the cost of token going down. So we need to plan around all this. Then, of course, making sure that AI can run close to where your data is. Specifically for Nutanix, one of the things that we really care about is regulated industries, and making sure that your AI application and your models can run close to where your data is, because data cannot always move to the public cloud, because today majority of AI is actually done in the public cloud. And if you can't move that, then you need to bring AI to data. In fact, that was the thing that Gartner kept on saying is, it's not moving data to AI, it's moving AI to data, to making sure that your AI can run as close to data as possible. And in fact, very funny if you think of it, that was what, and I always think about it like how the same concepts come back and back, in various form factors. Like
same story over and over and over.
Yeah, and it's just like, I always say this funny is that, the network is a necessity, but at the same time, the most, I would say, the biggest cost in computation. It's a necessity because we have computation and data distributed everywhere. But
Yeah.
at the same time, anytime you hit the network is an extra cost for you. And the reason we did hyperconvergence, if you think of when before hyperconvergence, there were other systems. Like if you look at data systems, and I was in Oracle, and when Exadata was getting built, one of the things with
Right.
Exadata was predicate pushdown, how you could move compute close to storage or your data. If you look at Hadoop, your job tracker would be moving the tasks close to where your data is. In
Yeah.
hyperconvergence, we tried to move data and compute together so that there
Yep.
was be lesser use of network. And this is the same thing. It's just at
Yeah.
different scales, right? With the AI, it's like you need to build the AI system as close to where your data is. Now we are not talking nodes, or we're not talking, a rack, at least a data center. Like, am I being able to run in the same data center where my data is? And of course, the closer you are, the lesser network you use. But this very essence of distributed computing is network is necessary, but also at the same time, network is your biggest expense.
Yeah.
And in some ways, how do you make that come together? Because more and more, if you see, data is so expensive to move because data is growing in
For
these
sure.
locations in such volumes. You just cannot move to AI systems which can be disparate. It has to be the other way around because compute still is very small. Even if you take a big model, right? A big model is maybe a few hundred gigs, which is nothing compared to your data, which could be in petabytes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. For
the
sure.
ability to move a few hundred gigs to your edge location might be much cheaper, and which probably you'll probably move maybe once a week, or maybe how often do you upgrade your models or things, compared to moving your data, which is changing like every second.
Yeah.
That is very important, is that in some ways, like in fact, marketing SVP, he actually coined the term that we're going into the world of cloud hyperconvergence.
Yeah.
How do
Right.
we? It's no longer node hyperconvergence, but
Oh
cloud
man.
hyperconvergence. It's like how do we? And at the end of the heart of hyperconvergence is actually how do we reduce the network impact of your compute and data?
It's the same story over and over. Well, and
Uh,
I think you're right, because I think one of the things I keep seeing is sort of like the argument for moving so much of it to the edge too. Like where a lot of that data lives, and doing it all there. And it's just and like and then you tie in like the rise of robotics and things like that. We're
oh
gonna
yeah.
that's a whole nother
That,
thing
that
too.
Yeah,
So
in fact,
it's
that is what the world is looking at because at the end of the day, it's the physical impact of this, right? Everything that we did today was in the digital world.
yeah,
Now, the
and
next
now it's got to have a
revolution
physical
is
presence.
it has to be a physical. That would be so interesting. Of course, we have a little bit of it with self-driving cars and all, but
Yeah.
I think robotics would be a different dimension. Oh, and I would love to have a robot at home doing all my chores. In fact, one of the things I read, which was really funny when LLMs came out, was like LLMs are doing the things that I really love, like writing something or singing or something,
Yeah.
and I would really love it to do my dishes.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly,
now,
exactly. Well,
maybe
I'll
that's
tell you
the next transition that will happen.
from some of the things I've seen lately coming out of the robotics community, I mean, we are not far away. We are not
We're
far
not
away,
far. Yeah, yeah,
and
I
it's
agree.
wild. It's wild.
Yeah,
It's a strange new world we're stepping into. So it's
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So, like we only got a few minutes left here, but like
Uh-huh.
what's next for Nutanix? Like what's the thing that's got you most excited?
So I think Nutanix is actually doing a lot of things in different dimension, but I would say the biggest growth for us is what I talked about is basically solving the AI problem because I feel that Nutanix has all the pieces. Like we have the ability to management complex infrastructure. We have data systems now, as you see, like with our structured and different data management systems, we can actually deploy this. And finally, we also bring in a lot of governance constructs, right? I think AI will be one of those applications which would need this integration across the stack, from your infrastructure to your data systems to your management and operations, that we can actually bring a very holistic solution to customers. Because I feel we have the pieces, but we have not put those pieces together to create like. Now, if you look at it, this is not that Nutanix alone. If you look at other companies, they're all struggling to put this. How do we create this one singular or simple way for an enterprise to consume the growth or the changes in the AI world, with all these different dimensions, with new hardware, new infrastructure software, new data management system, to new operations, to new governance. And I think if you look at it, we have all these pieces, but we did it for IT. We can do this for AI. And I think that would be, to me, that is very exciting, is that we've now got an application which really spans through the spectrum of things that we do, and we can give something that can make our enterprise. Like we call things like invisible infrastructure, right? But invisible infrastructure is only one piece of it. I think we really need to think about as like the way to think about it is an invisible platform for AI. To think of it like, can we make somebody, that would be the dream, that I would like to have an AI system which would do this, which would need this hardware, this infrastructure software, this data system with these pipelines, which would clean my data, create embeddings, create cataloging, categorization, security, and then I can govern of course, and associate my AI to this data, and then finally govern the output of it. So that is an end-to-end spectrum. And there are pieces of it that many companies, startups are doing in each of these different, I would say, isolated environments. But Nutanix is unique that we can do all of that, because I feel the hardest part of it is actually the hardware and this. Frankly, if you have, and of course, and the data system, I think these two are the hardest, because of course there is a lot of work going on there, but I think it takes years to actually write a new hypervisor, years to build a new data system.
Yeah.
If you look at the higher layers, they're iterating way faster. So either we partner and we get this, but to get this, building blocks built for the next generation of applications, we can do a lot. Either we build or partner, or whatever we do. But to end the customer, we should be able to do this, I would say, one-click AI, and that means the entirety of AI, that they have a use case and the use case gets solved.
That's an ambitious plan. I love it. I love it. I'll take one. Really fun conversation. Great talking to you. Great insights. And I'm excited to see where Nutanix goes next. And let's stay in touch and keep me posted on all the developments. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. It was fun. Great discussion.